So this is the ontological argument as explained by Descartes, which is he presents it differently than Anselm does, and some would say that he presents it in a different way that totally changes the argument. I'm not convinced of that. I think that this is basically the argument that Anselm makes, with one big exception that I'll explain in a second. But the argument essentially is, if God is, if there is a God, it is a perfect being, right? Which is a definition. So you just defined the God that you're talking about. A perfect being possesses all perfections by definition. And then existence is a perfection. That's a postulate. So you have to accept that. And then God necessarily possesses the quality of existence when you combine statements 1 through 3. Therefore, God exists. So the postulate that this argument rests on in the Descartes formulation is that existence is a perfection. And I love this formulation of the argument because it actually perfectly condenses the ultimate question. Existence versus non-existence. Do you prefer existence or non-existence? If you think existence is a good, meaning it's one of the perfections, then you're on the right side. I mean, this is the question that God puts to the Jews in Deuteronomy. He says, choose life or choose death. Choose life. Please choose life. It's crazy. You have the creator of the universe pleading with the Jews, like, choose life. Follow me. Follow the laws that I'm setting out here. And this is the difference between nihilism and a valid worldview. Well, I take it back. Nihilism is a valid worldview. It's nihilism and a true worldview, and a worth living worldview is existence or non-existence. Nihilism is the belief in nothing, that nothing is better than something. This is also essential in terms of some of the other arguments for God, in terms of why is there anything? Is existence better than non-existence? So I like this argument, but stated in this way, it still depends on a postulate that must be accepted by faith, namely that existence is a good or is a perfection. And that is still, like all postulates, a faith-based assumption, just by definition of what a postulate is. The way Anselm would have said it is, God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. And that's a fine way of saying it as well. But then even as Anselm argues it, he gets down to explaining how existence would be one of those perfections. And it works. The ontological argument works, but usually by the end of it, after having explained it, you will leave people feeling hoodwinked. They'll feel like, yeah, I feel like you cheated somewhere in there, but I'm not sure exactly where. And I think that when you really parse it out, you do get some version that looks like this, where you have to admit that existence as a perfection is a postulate, in which case you're no longer circular, but you still have something that you have to accept a priori, or you have something that you have to accept by faith. Not really a priori, but you have to accept it by faith. And I think this is an easy choice. If I had to choose between existence and non-existence, I choose existence every single time. And so I think this is a great argument if you are willing to argue at that level of the fact that existence is better than non-existence. I don't know. What do you guys think about that argument?
I've never heard it before, so I don't. To be perfectly honest, I don't totally understand it, and I think from the tag perspective, it makes, I guess, more sense to my mind. But again, this is the first time I've heard of it in this way. Like, so I don't even know necessarily what the postulate existence is perfection really means. So in this case,
the way Anselm would have started is that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. So, in other words, God is the greatest possible thing that you can conceive of. And if you're thinking of, some dude in the sky who doesn't exist, then, well, wait a second, you're not thinking about God. You're thinking about some dude in the sky who doesn't exist. You're not think of something greater than that, right? It doesn't matter. Forget the Bible. Forget our conception of God. Think of the greatest possible thing. All right, now you're thinking of the greatest possible thing. Wouldn't it be better if that thing existed? That would be even better than this thing that you're thinking of that doesn't exist, right? That's worse than this great thing that you're thinking of that does exist. Now, if you're not thinking of the greatest possible thing, then think of something greater than that, because that's the greatest possible thing. And we call that God just by definition, but it's the greatest possible thing. Think of the greatest possible thing. The criticism of this argument is, well, wait a second, aren't you just saying that if you can think of something, then it exists, right? Isn't that sort of the format of the argument? And it's not. That argument doesn't, that critique doesn't really pan out. Like even back in Anselm's day, there was a guy who came up with an argument and said, well, if I conceive of the greatest possible island, therefore that island exists. And he tried to formulate his argument in the exact same way that Anselm presented it, and that is a category error. You're not conceiving of the greatest possible thing. You're conceiving of the greatest possible island, and that island doesn't have to exist because it's you're talking about a thing. I'm talking about the greatest possible thing. Period. You're talking about an island, the greatest possible island. That's not the greatest possible thing. I'm talking about the greatest possible thing. Period. Thing qua thing, to use the British terminology. It's like thing as a thing. The greatest possible one certainly would include existence. It's got to exist. It would be better if it existed than it didn't exist. Therefore, if it is the greatest possible thing truly, then it must exist. That's the argument. Like I said, it's not very compelling to a lot of people because they just feel like, what? You're just thinking God into existence and saying that you've proved God? Which is why Anselm's way of presenting it was never as an argument to an atheist to prove God's existence. Anselm presented this argument in the form of a prayer and he titled the prayer Faith Seeking Understanding. So you already have faith in God. This is just a way of confirming the faith that you already have, which I'm totally okay with, right? That is what I'm saying you have to do. And so this argument doesn't work to prove God in a purely logical way. It either relies on this postulate of existence being a perfection, which you can either take or leave, right? And still be totally valid in your logic. One would lead you to nihilism, totally valid, but wrong, in my view. And then the other would lead you to God. So it's great. So I like the fact that it centralizes the error, which is why logic is great. It condenses where you might be wrong on a few basic things. But as an argument, as a coercive argument for God, it doesn't work. But it was never intended that way. And Descartes, the problem with the way Descartes was trying to use the argument was to coercively prove God a priori. He was trying to prove God purely using logic, and that's where it fails, because you don't prove anything here. You still have to rely on a faith-based assumption about existence. And so it doesn't work to prove God, but it does work as a confirming proof for why you should believe in God, because existence is in fact better than non-existence.